Welcome to Planet Word, the only museum in the country dedicated to renewing and inspiring a love of words, language, and reading. Before we continue, I'd like to invite the museum's beloved founder, Miss Anne Friedman.
Thank you, everybody, for being here tonight. And when Tom told me about the new book by his friend Martin Reeves, I thought it was a perfect choice for a book talk at Planet Word because it brings together technology and a book. And that's what we're all about at Planet Word. We try to have innovative galleries and experiences that use technology to bring language to life. And so if you haven't had a chance to visit the museum itself, please come back when we're open and enjoy all of our galleries. But tonight, you're going to enjoy a discussion about the nexus of these two things, words and communication and technology. And I'm so pleased to have Martin here, and my husband Tom to moderate, and my colleague Britt Oakes to introduce them.
So as Anne mentioned, we're really excited to welcome you all to tonight's programming event. This is Book Chat, Martin Reeves and Thomas Friedman, Like the Button That Changed the World. And we're really excited for tonight's program, which will include a discussion between Mr. Reeves and Mr. Friedman, and also we will have a Q&A, so get those questions ready. Martin Reeves is a managing director and senior partner in BCG's San Francisco office and chair of the BCG Henderson Institute, BCG's think tank. Mr. Reeves joined BCG in London in 1989 and later moved to Tokyo, where he was responsible for BCG's business with Western clients. His consulting career has focused on strategy, with equal emphasis on idea origination and development, and application by consulting with clients on their strategy challenges. Mr. Reeves is the co-author of Your Strategy Needs a Strategy and The Imagination Machine. Mr. Reeves holds a triple first-class MA in Natural Sciences from Cambridge University and an MBA from Cranfield School of Management. Thomas L. Friedman, an internationally known author and journalist, has won the Pulitzer Prize 3 times for his work at the New York Times. His foreign affairs column in the New York Times reports on U.S. domestic politics and foreign policy, Middle East conflicts, international economics, environment, biodiversity, and energy. Mr. Friedman is the author of many books, including award-winning titles such as From Beirut to Jerusalem, The Lexus and the Olive Tree, and Longitudes and Attitudes, Exploring the World After September 11, just to name a few. Please join me to get tonight's conversation started, Mr. Martin Reeves.
Thank you for coming, everybody. It's a great pleasure, double pleasure to be here this evening at Planet Word. Firstly, because it is a unique institution focusing on language, and you'll hear that my book is very much about gestural language and technology. And secondly, to have a jam, as Tom and I call it, with my friend Tom Friedman. We'll probably end up talking about all sorts of things. It'll be a great pleasure. Tom asked me to give us a little bit of grist for this discussion by briefly describing the book. So let me first show you where the book started. Could we have the picture, please? So I was getting to know my co-author, Bob Goodson. Bob Goodson, by the way, is a classical literature scholar, a medieval literature scholar, who went to work in Silicon Valley during the nuclear winter of Silicon Valley, as he puts it, between Web 1.0 and 2.0, when everybody else went back to their day jobs. So that's how a medieval language scholar gets a job in Silicon Valley. And we were just getting to know each other. And he was, so we met for half an hour coffee in Mill Valley in Silicon Valley. And we were making conversation, and I learned that Bob was an avid hoarder. He's collected every train ticket since he was 10 years old or something, and he was moving to the UK. from Silicon Valley. And so to make conversation, I said, oh, you must be having an interesting time finding stuff in your boxes of hoarded stuff. And he said, absolutely. So he pulls out some materials. And in one of his sketchbooks, he has this, and obviously some sort of like button. And then I noticed the date on it, and it was May 2005, which was at least 4 years before Facebook rolled out the like button. So I said, Bob, are you telling me you invented the like button? And he said, of course not. Well, maybe. So the half an hour chat turned into one day chat. We were thrown out of one coffee house and restaurant after another until we were thrown out of the latest opening sushi restaurant in Mill Valley. And then that turned into a three-year journey, essentially initially to answer the question, who invented the like button? And it was a 3-year onion peeling exercise. So the first question was, who invented the like button? And the answer is we still don't know. And in a way, that's one of the main themes of the book. Unlike the clear hero stories of Edison or Faraday inventing things in a single motive of inspiration on a single day, we found actually it was a very messy and serendipitous process. And as far as we can tell, that is the way that innovation works. It's more social and serendipitous and unpredictable than we often represent it in post hoc hero stories. And then the next question was, well, what does this tell us about innovation and how innovation works? And so we looked at a whole bunch of other innovations, and it turned out actually to be the pattern. There was a clear pattern, which is the stories we tell after the event essentially suppress the forgotten heroes and celebrate this deliberate, far-sighted act in a single moment of invention that doesn't appear to be historically accurate for many of the inventions we looked at. And then the language part. So Bob was very naturally interested in the question, why the thumb then? And of course, the thumb is a long-standing piece of gestural language. The primates like to show their opposable thumbs to each other, and so not surprisingly, this gesture repeats throughout history and repurposed for meaning. It evolves, and we did some fascinating detective work around the clear idea that many of us may have that this all originates in the Roman Colosseum. The thumbs up means the fallen gladiator dies, and the thumbs up means that he's shown mercy. And it turns out that this is a historical fiction for dramatic effect by a painter in the 1870s called Gérôme. And it was the same painting, by the way, that was shown to Ridley Scott to persuade him to make the Gladiator 1 movie, which, of course, further perpetuated this myth about the gestures that the Romans made. But it firmly planted this gesture in American culture. And so not surprisingly, when the engineers were in the early days of Web 2.0, around 2000, were looking for a way of attracting user content. Web 2.0 basically means the social web. And the essence of the social web is that the consumers are the creators. People volunteer restaurant reviews and other creative content. And that democratization of content is the essence of Web 2.0. The problem was that nobody wanted to donate any content. So there were all sorts of trials about how to solve this problem. And Bob, as a classical literature scholar, realized that recognition and reciprocity were some of the key currencies of our species. And so the industry reached for the like button. So social media took off. Now, it's not at all clear how it wasn't initially at all clear how to make that a business, though. So we had restaurant reviews, and we had a recognition system based upon a universal gesture. So the business, there's a chapter on the business of likes. How did this become a billion-dollar business? And the short answer was that essentially the age-old joke in advertising is the historic dilemma of advertising, that half of my advertising is wasted, I just can never know which half. And essentially this is the feedback loop that says that Tom likes that content. And of course, that's an incredibly valuable system. Now, we did have feedback. before 2000. If you remember set-top boxes, a company called Nielsen would put a box on the top of your TV set, and they could figure out whether people were watching Channel 36. What they couldn't figure was whether people were actually watching or in the kitchen making tea, or whether they loved or hated it. So they didn't really have very good feedback. But this is a feedback loop that essentially turns the advertising industry upside down and eventually provides the business model for social media. So the business model is essentially sell targeted advertising to advertising to companies that want to advertise, and offer free services to attract the attention of consumers so that they transmit these signals, free services like email and social chat and so on, so that the industry finds a business model. We look at a special language in one of the chapters, the language which is obscure to many of us, the language of coding. So what actually is the like button? It's a picture of an ancient gesture, but actually it's a dozen lines of JavaScript code. It's a coding invention. And the interesting thing about JavaScript was it was designed to run browsers, and one of the essential problems of making a response button is that in the era of dial-up internet, which and pre-broadband, which some of you may remember, the last thing you wanted to do was to trigger a page refresh, because you would lose the user or the consumer for 10 seconds, 20 seconds, and they'd go away and do something else. And so the question was, could you use JavaScript for a purpose which it had never been designed for, to actually trigger instantaneous transmission of a recognition signal from the person rating the review to the person who wrote the review, and do that without triggering a page refresh? And the answer is yes, that was the innovation. Again, serendipity. It happened that JavaScript could do this, although nobody had designed it to do this. We then go on to look at unintended consequences. When we think of social media, we may think about the pleasantness of corresponding with our friends and our family, and being part of a very niche interest group. I'm part of a niche interest group for Scottish Highland bagpipers, for example. Would have been very difficult for me to do that from California before social media. But also there's a dark side, of course, teenage mental health, misinformation, social polarization. So how do we get from this innocent little gesture and a dozen lines of JavaScript code to social and psychological side effects, unintended consequences, and how do we regulate for those unintended consequences, which is pretty hard because the benefits were also unintended. When Bob drew this first sketch in 2005, he wasn't thinking about a monetization mechanism for social media. He was thinking about trying to attract restaurant reviews. He was trying to solve a far more tactical problem. The eventual benefits were a surprise. The eventual disbenefits were a surprise. So it's a very difficult regulatory problem if you can't even anticipate the benefits, let alone the disbenefits. And then, of course, you may say, well, why devote so much attention to such a small thing, just one icon in one type of communication channel? Well, I think I'd give two answers. One of them is that it's probably the smallest thing I can find in technology with the biggest impact. It changed how we communicate, changed how we affiliate, changed how we transact, it changed how we created. So it's important in its own right. But also, by looking at this particular story in all of its dimensions and its details, I think it tells us a lot about how to think about deploying and regulating the next big technology wave, AI, to good effect. So that's a little potted summary of the book. If I just add one more thing, which connects it back to language, I've written 13 books, all dull business books in a sense. They're all framework-driven. They're all, I hope they're informative, but they're not the sort of thing that you'd curl up in bed with. And I always wanted to write a book that I would want to curl up in bed with. And I had a winding story in mind. I had the book Swerve in mind by the Shakespeare scholar Greenblatt, which is a big detective story about the hunt for a lost classical book. But I had no idea how to write that book. And so perhaps Tom and I can, who's of course a master storyteller, perhaps we can chat a little bit about what I discovered about the art of writing such a book rather than the sort of books I normally read. So let me stop there. Hopefully that's enough, Chris, for a discussion.
Well, first of all, thank you for doing this. It's a measure of a great intellectual friendship, which Martin and I have, that I don't even remember how it started. All I remember is all the conversations we've had since. Did you call me or did I call you? I'm really not sure anymore.
I remember I spilled coffee over you once.
That's right.
I can't remember how it all started.
And Martin also has organized an incredible group of technologists and evolutionary biologists, basically, and we meet around the world once a year, and we have these amazing discussions. So great to have you here at Planet Word.
Thank you, Tom.
So let me get right to it. Did the like button destroy Western civilization?
Well, I think people like you and me, looking at it from the perspective of the previous wave of technologists, might think so. But we thought the same thing about the telephone and the television. I think the truth is that every evolution in communication technology forces evolution in language and culture, and there are some planned benefits, there are unintended benefits, and there are unintended disbenefits that become the grist for the next wave of innovation. So sure, I'm concerned about my three daughters spending too much time on the web, but I'm happy that one of the uses they put the web to is to make, one of my daughters makes multiplayer animation. She essentially goes and creates a community that designs animated films online. So it's, it can be used for creative and literary activities as much as time wasting. So probably not.
Why, though, the thumb? Why was it chosen? Why was it so evocative?
Well, one story might be, this is just such an important gesture. It's, babies are obsessed with, by the way, I'm a former biologist, so there'll be a little bit of biology in this evening too. Babies are obsessed by hands and faces, their identity and their agency, and it's not surprising they're defining features of humanity. And so the gestures involving hands are thought to maybe have preceded spoken language. And so, of course, when we want to communicate something really primitive and of the essence, like recognition, we think of the hands. But I think there's a deeper reason, which is the sociality of our species. So the opposable thumb is one hallmark, but essentially social learning is the defining trait of our species from my perspective. Social learning means I don't have to learn that jumping off a cliff is a bad idea by jumping off myself. I can observe other people doing so and decide not to do that. And I can even listen to their stories and decide that's not a good idea. And our brains are actually wired to therefore recognize the people that we learn from, and also to take note of who people are learning from. And if you think about the like button, it contains two essential features. One of them is recognition, and the other one is homophily. Like means I have a preference for your content. It also has this ambiguous meaning of I am like you. So this is our social learning in action. And so not surprising that as the reach of technology expands communications, we can communicate with more and more people with greater ease. We need to put back some of the humanity that goes missing in the broadened communication. In this case, we need to put back the currency of recognition.
Talk a little bit, Martin, about how it became a multi-billion-dollar business. In reading up, there was one statistic that really jumped out at me, that over 160 billion times a day, someone taps a like button.
Right.
160 billion times a day.
Right.
It's amazing.
That's 7 billion for Facebook alone, and probably about 50 billion if you include all of the social media.
Wow.
And of course, it's spread beyond social media, because you can now like non-user created content. You can now like Netflix films, and you can like blogs, and in the latest iterations of email software, you can even like email messages. So it sounds like an incredible number, but it's billions of times a day, and in a way that is the new currency of attention. So it could have been, the business model that we have is not the only logical possibility. It could have been that we as users would pay for the services of communicating with our friends, or or email. But we instead have this advertising-driven business model whereby in the process of giving my attention to a platform, like Facebook, I also give off signals about who I affiliate with and what I like, and that gives me targeted content feeds. It gives me more of the content that I want. It also tells the advertisers what I want, and so that's the deal, and that's a very big number because advertising was really so untargeted historically. Yeah. If you think about how advertising works, if you think about the series Mad Men, it's a very unlikely nexus of executives in suits in large companies and creators with long hair saying, "Believe me, this advert will work."
Yes.
And then, in aggregate it worked, but you didn't know which part of it worked. Yeah. And so it essentially solved that problem. It's a little cost-free, almost feedback loop, and that knows more about you than you know yourself, actually. If you may think that you prefer this brand of cheese to that brand of cheese, you may have that opinion about yourself, but whether that's actually true or not, your data may, in some cases, give a better opinion. So it's extremely powerful, the aggregation of these small signals.
It really affected journalism because, of course, when I joined the New York Times, the advertising model was that we sold advertisements to car dealers, say, and they paid for me to go to the Middle East and cover the Israeli-Arab conflict. But there was no connection between us. And in the aggregate, they just hoped that more people would read the New York Times, and they did, and it all sort of worked. And then we went through a huge dip when the like button showed up, because suddenly, people could do this targeted advertising, and so much of it moved to social media, and we had to find another way, another business model, basically, to attract people through games and cooking and the news as well. But excuse me, we survived that transition. A lot of newspapers did not. I mean, the like button.
Actually, I'm curious. Why do you think the New York Times survived? Because essentially, it was the loss of your revenue stream, wasn't it? These new sort of digital channels just stole your revenue and it was very rapid because digital technology scaled very rapidly. So pretty hard to adjust to a business model that had been around for years and years.
Yeah, well, I lived through the whole thing. So it's the whole transition, including when they made the paywall first just for columnists. Because they thought, well, people pay for columnists, and then you lose readers because of that. So they survived by being extremely nimble and creative, creating basically an entire package of games, puzzles, cooking, sports, Wirecutter, and really reconceiving, the whole notion of a newspaper. And of course, a lot of that it goes to paying for the news. And in a noisy world, there was a sort of backflip where it turned out that, yes, a lot of people loved to be able to go to their local blogger and get news from him or her, but a lot of people actually still wanted branded content and news that they could trust. And there were enough of them around the world that with a World Wide Web, we could aggregate them into subscribers.
And that's an interesting flip side to the creator economy, isn't it? That, in a sense, by having 100 opinions I can go to, I'm better off.
Right.
But not knowing which ones I can trust, the demise of the big trusted sources like the BBC and the major newspapers, I actually have a new problem, which is I don't know which information to trust.
Yeah, and so fortunately we created a brand where there were enough people around the world who wanted branded, trusted content that they thought, I think rightly, to get from the New York Times. And so the problem is we now have more digital subscribers, and close to 12 million, than the Wall Street Journal, the Washington Post, the Los Angeles Times, Chicago Tribune, the Economist, all combined. And so if anyone here is thinking going to the newsprint business, I'd suggest you think twice, because there's really not a great future in it. Thank God I work for the institution that survived it, and I wish others would as well, but it's become harder and harder because of that little like button and the intimate connection it made between your wishes and the advertiser. But Martin, also getting back to the destroying Western civilization, Jonathan Haidt has really compared the like button to giving everyone in the world a dart gun. He said the like button and the share button really is what destroyed, is what's polarizing our society. Because basically, when you say when you read neo-Nazi content and you like it, it's like a dart gun. You're directing at someone and saying with, hey, look at this, share this. To what extent, just to drill down on that a little bit, can we ever overcome the polarization embedded in this like button economy, which clearly is so powerful it's not going away?
Well, the like button, by touching on one of the people interviewed in the book called it the atom of content. The smallest possible unit of content you can have contains no words. It's just to give a gesture of approval.
Yeah.
And so something so basic to human discourse, of course, it changed everything for better and worse. And that's a really tough regulatory problem. So we certainly had a rise, or at least an apparent focus on a whole new set of problems. And there are many, right? There's monopolization, there's misinformation, there's social polarization, there's teenage mental health. And if we couldn't even anticipate the business model of social media, how could we anticipate the disbenefits? And once you have, how can we trace causality? Because the social media companies are many things at once, right? I mean, they use the like button, they use artificial intelligence to profile users, they use a particular type of business model, they have a particular type of value proposition, and which part of that is causing what? And of course, it triggered a lot of science, but the jury is still out on many aspects of the science.
The data science.
The science of the causality of the side effects, if you will.
Interesting.
Let alone the interventions. And we had a dinner on that you attended in Washington with the regulators, saying, what sort of problem is this? And essentially, part of the problem is an age-old problem, which is you can't regulate a technology until you know what it can do, and that takes a while. And there's something called regulatory lag, which is, and who would be the last people in the world to be experts on this technology? Probably the regulators and the lawyers, and the science takes time, so there's inevitable lag. So part of what looks like bumbling is actually the regulatory system in action, trying to figure out what works and what doesn't work. What is different this time? I think the difference with digital technologies is that that bumbling process has to be much faster because the technologies spread much faster, especially in sensitive areas. So I think probably the one place where I'd anticipate more action is on teenage mental health. So not surprisingly, putting counters on like buttons and has an enormous impact. I think the case is very strong on teenage mental health, especially girls for some reason. When they are forming their social intelligence, they're very sensitive to social comparison. So some countries already moved to restrict that. And Jonathan Haidt's book says that actually the best regulation is not regulation at all. It's family norms. It's actually having the father or the mother saying, I'm putting a cap on internet time and which sites you can visit. But part of this we still haven't figured out. There's a great controversy, in fact, whether what is causing the polarization. Is it an echo chamber effect, or is it a megaphone effect? An echo chamber effect is, if you and I are part of some special group, we only speak to people like us, and we compete to have more and more extreme opinions, and we're unconstrained by interacting with other groups. So that's one hypothesis.
Interesting, yeah.
There's another hypothesis, which is if you give every lunatic a megaphone, make them a publishing company, essentially, of course you have new problems.
Yeah.
So I believe the weight of the evidence is a little bit towards the latter rather than the former, but that's something the scientists are still figuring out.
Yeah, I think this issue of the speed of regulation is both the speed and depth of regulation, because the technology gets extremely deep. In the book I'm working on, we had these leaked emails from the New York Times from Boeing when the MAX issue, was at its height. And one of these emails, I'm not getting this exactly right, but it's close, was a Boeing engineer talking about his FAA regulator. And he basically said, my FAA regulator is so clueless about what I do. Watching him watching me is like watching dogs watching television. And I think there is that, this asymmetry now between the regulator and the innovators that is really getting huge, which brings up my next question, which is what...
Actually, just to comment on that, Thomas, it's interesting. So if we were dealing with human intentionality, I intend to do this, and the regulators or society decide, well, that's not a good thing.
Yes.
Having transparency and symmetry can sort that problem out fairly quickly. The problem is with algorithms, and this very much takes us into AI, is that it's not the intention of one person. There's an emergence in the complex system of the algorithms. So if you, a question which doesn't have any meaning is, for instance, what do the major social media companies, what are their policies around, targeting and transmitting and applying particular groups?
Yes.
They may have some guardrails, they may have some guidelines, but essentially many of the properties we're talking about are emergent properties of algorithms. It's equivalent to the problem of explainability with large language models. You get the answer you get from the prompt, but why do you get the answer?
Yes, yeah, exactly.
What is the logic of the answer? We're still figuring that out.
So what if I was reading about this example in Wired, what if I created a bot, a Tom Friedman bot, and charged people 25 cents to ask me a question, and then created a bot, 100 bots or 100 million bots to like all the answers? I mean, what is the future of this? Will there be an artificial me and an artificial bot liking me?
Great question. So we looked very hard for people that had foreseen the benefits and the disbenefits of the social media revolution. And actually it absolutely wasn't any of the inventors of these things like the like button, because we spoke to them all. They had no clue, really. They were trying to solve tactical problems, not grand, social schemes. And they were trying to solve a problem like, how do I attract more restaurant reviews? But we did find one person that more or less foresaw the whole evolution. And guess what the profession of that person was? Novelist.
Interesting.
It was Gary Steingart,
Wow.
New York. So he wrote a book called True Sad Love Story, where he just imagined. So he approached it a little different from the technologists. The technologists would tend to ask a question like, what can this technology do? What are the side effects of the technology? He asked the question, assuming the technology can do what it is claimed to do, and knowing humanity, how would we use and abuse that technology? So he was more focused on the human side of the equation, and he foresaw a lot of this. But most people didn't foresee this. And now, in terms of the dystopia you describe, we already have some elements of it. I mean, there are like factories.
There are like factories.
There are like factories. I mean, a like.
Could I hire a like factory to like your book?
Yes, you can if you like. I mean, be most welcome.
Would someone pay me to like your book in a like factory?
But it's an arms race because, of course, you do that, and then we figure out an algorithm that says it's a bit strange that all of those likes came from at 8 o'clock from Planet Word. So we'll suppress those. So you have this, you have that effect, and you have probably the most exotic part of the book for me. There was a part of the book where I thought I was walking on another planet. It was when I went to see the new species in the zoo of the creator economy. So I went out and I spoke to 16-year-old dancers that have 50 million fans and $5 million of income.
Wow.
And I spoke to the agencies that give them business training and algorithmic training, and there's a whole economy of liking out there, including some sort of shady elements like factories. Right. So we have that.
Let me ask one more question, then we'll open it to the audience. In every culture, because obviously Facebook's in 100 plus languages, is it called the like button everywhere?
Mostly. So language converges and diverges. So initially, so Bob proposed the sketch I showed you, a like button, but a like and a dislike button, a thumbs up and a thumbs down. A lot of sites had a thumbs down, and the thumbs down disappeared. Why? Because the advertising-based business model. You don't want to discourage attention to the platform. The thumbs up became a sort of de facto standard, although Yelp, the company that first sketched that pair of icons, actually went with a multi-icon version. So they had funny, interesting call or something like that. But there was this convergence towards the like symbol, the thumbs up symbol, not complete. So if you look worldwide, the heart is probably number 2. So a lot of Asian cultures use the heart. And in the US we have Reddit uses arrow up and arrow down. So it's not complete convergence. And interestingly, we've come full circle because now the multifunctional like button is becoming the new standard to give nuance in reactions. So Facebook,
you could give a half a like? Or?
Well, no, you can give a puzzled face, you can give a smiling face, you can give some hands clapping.
Interesting.
So a lot of sites now have 5 or 6 icons. What do they call it? In the US, it's predominantly called the like button. In Japan, it's called ine, which means nice. So it's a sort of similar idea of appreciation. I like it. In Russian, it's nравится, which means I like, so it's the same thing. In Chinese, it means touch the appreciation, so like touch and evaluate. Slightly different nuance, but essentially there's like 60% convergence on a thumb symbol and the idea of liking. Now, I think the unique ambiguity that English has for this gestural symbol is this idea of preference and homophily. I like you and I am like you. Mm-hmm. Not all languages share that ambiguity. And that comes back to the brain science, essentially. We like to learn from people like us because the learnings are more likely to be relevant. Yeah. So I'm looking for, do I like it, and do you seem like me? So can I learn from you?
Floor is open. Who has a question? Back there.
Thank you. So, Tom, this is picking up off what you mentioned about why the New York Times potentially survived. And it's a question for you, Martin. Do you see a future market opportunity for, similar to those consumers who would be willing to pay for the New York Times in the era of social media, for consumers who would pay for those basic services that we get for free, like email, social sharing, who don't want to be part of that feedback loop? Do you think it's naive to think that that's even possible at this point?
Well, I think it is possible because new freedoms require more innovation. So I have more places I can seek opinions, and I can be more targeted in the opinions I'm seeking than ever before. But I've got a new problem, which is which opinions to trust. And so actually, I'm one of the people that dropped out of newspaper subscriptions and came back because I've made a few mistakes trusting things that seem trustworthy that were not trustworthy. And one of the if you look at the economics of trust, one of the things about having a trusted brand is you potentially damage your entire brand if you tell a lie, if you breach the trust. So there's a massive incentive for the New York Times to continue to pay fair. So I've come back to the newspaper subscriptions actually, and it's interesting to generalize your question to sort of say new freedoms require new constraints, new innovations. And what other ones? I think another one is authenticity is a new and emerging problem, which is somebody is talking to me. They're saying their name is Tom, but how do I know it's Tom Friedman and not an avatar? Or I think that's a growing problem. But the used right, I'm finding that the social media has its own intelligence, which is so humans have always had a trust problem. People tell us things, and we have to decide whether to trust them. And it turns out that one of the main mechanisms that we do that by is to look at who else trusts them. Essentially, do I trust the people that trust? We look at multiple sources of authentication, and I can do that on social media. I can look at like who is liking this, who is part of this community, who commented on this, and which is. It's a sort of my version of an echo chamber, I guess. So I may not be an extremist sect, but I hang out with a certain set of people because I want to have valid opinions. So I look at who's in my communities. But I think there are new monetization games. I think we had a clean out of newspapers that couldn't make the grade. Yeah. But I think the New York Times was very strong, right?
Yeah. Yeah. No, now we're thriving. Yeah.
And we have new businesses that appear to be quite successful too. Yeah. New online news businesses that are serious.
Yeah, it's just a hard business to start de novo now because of these trust reasons. Yeah, please, right there. Yeah, wait for the microphone.
Thanks. You're an evolutionary biologist, so I have a question related to that, related to a New York Times article last week by the head science writer Stolberg. She got schooled by Emily A. Kopp, who's been covering COVID since the beginning of Kaiser and the CQ roll call and U.S. right to know. So the science writer is biased based on political reasons. There's a book came out on Princeton Press called "In the Wake of COVID." It said trust in the media and trust generally is eroded because of politicalization of science. So all this stuff is public information. Is evolutionary biologist, would you tell the truth about where COVID came from? And if you're in the business of gain-of-function research, you're going to say that
It's
it
a little
wasn't.
off the subject tonight, though. I think I'm just
Okay, but
there's
so
a question on the book or something.
So the question is the trust. So, and you have some old school people that are very political, and they're in charge. They're the head science writer. Maybe they should be have a different department. Like she used to be the bureau chief, Washington bureau chief.
We'll leave that for later, okay? But thank you. I just want to focus on the book. Yeah,
Sorry.
those two, both of
So,
you.
Tom, I was struck by your column, I think it was yesterday in the New York Times, the Dear President Trump column, and I wanted to like it, and I think I was the 680th billionth person yesterday to like it because I got up late. What struck me was, thumbs up, thumbs down, black and white.
Right.
But it's overly simplistic, particularly at a place like Planet Word, which is all about the nuances of words. And here you had people who were thumbs up on Tom Friedman, who were MAGA people.
Right.
And the MAGA crowd says, oh, he's finally gotten it. The New York Times and Tom Friedman are finally Trump supporters. And then you have other people who are thumbs down saying, oh, what's this? He's just sucking up to Donald Trump just like anyone else. And so I found what was most valuable about the thumbs up and thumbs down was actually the comments, which yesterday were really quite remarkable in terms of explaining why they were up and why they were down. And that's not always the case on, I don't follow Reddit, but a lot of these places don't give you the opportunity to say that. And if, frankly, they give you the opportunity, frankly, no one reads them.
Yeah.
I think with respect to the Times, a lot of people do read them.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering what you think about that, particularly in the context of this museum, which is all about words.
Yeah, a very, very interesting question. I'll give you a short answer because I want to hear what Martin has to say. So as everyone at the New York Times knows, my colleagues at least, I've actually never looked at Twitter. I've never looked at Facebook. I've never looked at Instagram. I've never looked at TikTok. And I've never smoked a cigarette. And my plan is to die saying all five. So because I actually think they really ruin journalism because you start then writing for that one person. So I've never looked at any of them. I consume none. I do read the comments, though. On my column, and I find them very informative. And if there are 1,500 comments, on a column, which is a nice number, if you get that, people are reacting. I find that a lot of them will be really the way you described them, like, one side or the other, pretty obvious. You can tell from the first sentence, but 5 of them will be flat out brilliant. They're just, and I cut them out and I save them. There is wisdom in crowds, but you have to find it, and the like button alone, can't do that. So I think that's an interesting question between the like button and the comment.
Yeah, I think this reminds me of like a debate between proper grammar and, English as it's used. I mean, purists will say, grammar's degenerating, and, sort of somebody more believing in Wittgensteinian language games will say, well, language is a game and the rules are whatever they are. And so I'm partly in the communications business. I research business topics and I write about them, and so I have a choice to make. The gold standard is the long form article in a scientific journal or in in a management magazine and peer-reviewed articles and so on. But that's not the only way to communicate. So I've sort of reconciled these things by what I call fractal communication, which is communicate at all spatial scales. So have your extremely well-reasoned opinion that's so voluminous that nobody's going to read it, and have your sort of punchy paper based upon that, and have your LinkedIn posts and have your tweets, because you're just going to sort of miss out on part of the discourse if you're too traditional about how to make those trade-offs. But I do like to go in the direction of not only conciseness but re-expansion, because you can solve for ambiguity and polarization the more the longer form the communication. There was actually a wonderful piece in the I think the New York Times a while ago where a sort of a radical left female journalist went to visit for a week or something with a sort of a radical Republican, and it was the story of that, and you could see that like the more dimensions on which they exchanged information,
yes,
the more it was impossible not to understand each other as human beings.
Yeah.
So it started off almost like a visceral hatred of the other side in both directions, and ended up with thinking, oh, actually, of 100 dimensions, we share 60.
Well, it's interesting you say that, actually. For anyone listening on C-SPAN, I actually tweet my column, and my assistant does it. I don't know how to do it. But I use Twitter as a broadcast platform, and it's fantastic for that. And the others. But when young journalists come to me and say, I want to be a journalist, I want to do what you do, what do I need to know? I said, well, you need to know how to type fast. I can type really fast. I went to Knight's Secretarial School in London to learn how to type fast. And you need to know good grammar, and you need to know English, and you need to know specialties, different subjects. But there's actually one thing you need above all others to be a successful journalist.
Let me guess.
You have to like people.
Yeah, right.
You have to actually, it's amazing to me how many journalists hate people, but you actually have to like people. You have to enjoy hearing the crazy things they say, do, aspire, want, fear. And when people sense that you like them, they like you back. And by that, I don't mean that they pat you on the back, whatever, but they trust you a little bit more. And if you honor their trust, they will tell you deep things. And so that's something I practice a lot. Mm-hmm. It's my own personal like button,
Yep. Actually liking people.
Joe, yeah.
Oh, Tom.
We'll get to everybody, yeah.
Yeah, you've been talking a lot about the user here, but we're giving away a piece of us every time we hit a like button. And you hit 25, and suddenly they know more about you than your spouse, right? So I was wondering if you talk about sort of, the saying in Silicon Valley, if the product is free, you're the product. We're the product here, right? And we just simply become amount of data that they have, and they can predict our actions, and they can sell us stuff, and they can tweak the whole Cambridge Analytica, issue. So I'd just be interested in your thoughts about that side of things.
Yeah. Well, I think the U.S. Constitution, sort of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. I think now that we have unparalleled technological freedom, I think constraints are important too. In other words, there's nothing inevitable about the impact of a technology, because we're the ones that get to use it and socially regulate it. And I think with this problem of the speed of onset of unintended consequences, we need to actually have regulatory innovation. For instance, the idea of public observatories. So public observatory is somebody on the regulatory side is actually looking at the data as it's coming in. So they get early warning signals of hypotheses to test things that might be wrong. I mean, I think we maybe need to up our game, because these things unfold unfold so fast. And so one of the most interesting meetings I had recently was this meeting with regulators on the topic of regulatory innovation in Washington a few months ago, where we talked about what are those innovations that are required. And the wish list was training regulators in technology. Another one was public observatories.
What's a public observatory?
A public observatory is this idea of that the data is not private. The regulators can see the data patterns early, so they can see early warning signals. Another one is adaptive regulation. I think one of the most innovative attempts to regulate technology, in at least that I'm familiar with, is air transportation safety. So it used to be that flying was the least safe mode of travel, and now it's one of the most safe modes of travel. And why is that? It's not because we anticipated problems. It's not because we had a one-shot round of legislation. It's that we had an adaptive protocol whereby every time an accident occurred, there was an investigation protocol, and then we took action on the things that we learned from that particular accident, and then we just repeated and we repeated and repeated, which is a very biological model in a way. So we can do that. We've done that in a major way with air transport. So maybe we need the technological equivalent of that. And one of the reasons for writing the book was to see what we can extract from the history of the technology cycles that are already played out that we might apply to the next one, which is really big, which is technologies that are more intelligent than human beings.
Joe, your question reminds me, and Martin's answer, of Eric Brynjolfsson and Andy McAfee in their book, The Second Machine Age, told the story that the authors of The Jetsons, which came out, the cartoon, I'm dating myself here, in 1962, and they imagined it was about the world in 2062. And as you recall, because some of you look my age, George Jetson drove his own flying saucer. So these people, they were writing a cartoon. They could imagine anything in the world, and they couldn't imagine Waymo. And also George Jetson, they had a photo phone, but it was fixed to the wall, so they couldn't. And it just humbles you when you think about the regulators, trying to figure this out. We got time for a couple more. Yeah, please.
Thanks. Maybe it's on a futurist theme, and I don't think you see yourself necessarily as futurist, but I was intrigued, Tom, when you said that, the New York Times survived this business model transition. Yay. It felt like you were implying you're done, and
oh, no, we're
the
not
question
there.
I have is, what do you
yeah,
think are the
question.
next iterations and disruptions? And maybe that's also a broader question, not just in journalism, but in the whole world that's being kind of driven by all of this social media stuff. And
well,
maybe AI
it's not
the answer.
unrelated to the AI and them but I think we're all trying to figure out the AI thing, right now, and how it will affect everything, because obviously there's the trust question, who wrote this, but I lost my train of thought here for a second.
Next iterations in business model or disruptions.
Right. So when I joined when I moved from being a reporter to joining the editorial staff, I think there were 15 people. There were 7 columnists. We were twice a week. And I think there were like 7 people on the ed board, an editor and a deputy editor. Maybe there were 18. There are over 200 now. Because we have editorial video, we have editorial audio, editorial documentaries now. And so it's become a giant enterprise. And now you'll see, and they're experimenting all the time. You'll go to New York Times Online now, you'll have a reporter telling the story on the front page. And so because all of these are, I'm working on a book on this, so all of these are phase changes. But when you go from the phase change of the Industrial Revolution to the digital revolution to the AI revolution, the phase changes come faster and faster. And so you've got to run faster and faster just to stay ahead of them. And because all this technology is democratized now, we used to be just competing. You're not going to believe this story, but I'll tell you how old I am. Okay, when I came to Washington after being in Beirut and Jerusalem in 1988, and I joined the Washington Bureau, I discovered that every night at 10 p.m., the New York Times and the Washington Post faxed each other their front pages. Okay, and if you were, as I was, the State Department correspondent then, if the Washington Post had a story on their front page, it was actually at usually around 10:35 this happened. If they had a story on their front page that we didn't have, your phone rang at 10:35, and you had to start matching their story at 10:35. Now, calling government officials at 10:35, I can tell you, it's the worst thing in the world. And I literally used to look at my watch, 10:35, 10:36, 10:37. Whew, I'm okay. Man, if that thing rang at 10:38, I was going to have a bad night. And so that's how many iterations, this has changed. We were then just competing with the Washington Post, basically. That's the way it started. Now we're competing against any blogger, any online, the free press, now has 1.25 million, 1.3 million readers. I mean, it's amazing. You can really, start something overnight. And so everyone's got to run faster and faster.
That's actually fairly close to the core of my day job, which is thinking about sustainability and competitive advantage and trust in the context of, what does the New York Times do next? And I think there's a couple of lessons from technology history. I think one of them is that the effect, be it malign or beneficial, is not at the level of the technology; it's at the level of the business model. So if you think about the like button, essentially some engineer on a tactical problem invented the like button and the 12 lines of JavaScript. But actually, it was Facebook's business model that was had great consequence. So business model is one. I think regulation. I think that I think unconstrained freedom is not a great thing for business. I think that a business with a referee, a business that has agreed rules and constraints, is usually far more sustainable. So I do a lot of proselytizing about think through the regulatory game. It's in your interest to have a constrained game, not a free-for-all game. I think another one is we call artificial intelligence, and the nuance is that there's some sort of machine that can give an individual an answer to a very difficult question. I prefer to call it automated collective intelligence, because in a sense humans have to ask the questions, commission the output, agree based upon the output. So what we should really be interested in is the combination of the technology and the human system. So what is how is decision making within the human cyber bionic organization of the New York Times, how's that going to work? If we think about it as a purely technological problem, it's like judging an element of a system without looking at the entire system. I think another one is validation. I think most mature businesses, if you make a claim, like this drug works or something, you have to do some clinical trials. I think for early phase technologies like AI, we don't have our validation of claims game worked out. So I think for important things like judging job applications, let's say, in an automated way. I think we need some clinical trials protocol that says we've tested it on 1,000 people and it works, and there are side effects in 0.04% of cases, and this is the action that we're taking. But that usually comes a little later in the life cycle of a technology. But I think it's good to look ahead. In a way, the unit of discussion, the technology, is too small, I think, to talk about these problems.
I think just to pick up on Martin's point, we were talking about this a little earlier, that we're on the cusp of an amazing, incredible discussion of moral philosophy and ethics as a society in America and as a global society. And I had an experience. I was just in China a few weeks ago, and I was at an economics conference, and they with a group of leading Chinese economists, and I was asked to give a talk, and I began by saying, look, my name is Thomas Friedman, not Milton Friedman, okay? So I'm not an economist, all right? But I want to share with you, I had a nightmare last night. I dreamt that it was the year 2030, and all that America could sell China was soybeans, and all China could sell America was soy sauce. And why is that? Because AI is actually going to go into everything. It's going to be different from other technology. It's going to go into your glasses. It will translate for you. It's going to go into your car, your toaster, your refrigerator. This chair will say, boy, that question really made Martin uncomfortable. It's going into everything. And when AI is in everything, everything becomes TikTok. That is, we're having this huge debate now with China over TikTok, okay? Because who gets the data? Where does it go? Where does it come from? Who controls the stream? And once AI is in everything, everything's TikTok. And when everything's TikTok, how are you going to buy anything from China? And how are we going to sell them anything if we don't trust each other? So this is about to, I think, just explode. And we're now peeling at the edges. We got time for a couple more questions, then we all have to buy Martin's book before we let you out. So please, right here, yeah.
Can I ask my question? Thank you very
I'm
much.
going to get both of you. So,
Great. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
My question is tough, and I apologize in advance. I recently heard Noah Harari speaking about AI and the moral ethical problem. He was very, very clear on the usefulness of information. He said it's a lot of junk. And people used to equate information with truth. And truth is, by its nature, costly to get, complex to understand, and sometimes painful because it's not what you want to hear, yeah? Whereas information is easy. It's not complex. It's a bullet point sometimes, yes? And it's also what you want to hear, makes you feel happy. And so my question to you is, what's the usefulness of the
Like button.
like button if what it takes us is to a society in which you're equating that information
With truth
and trust.
Yeah.
And it's undermining our systems, our society, our capacity to cooperate.
Great question. Thank you.
Well, I think we tend to take the benefits of new technologies for granted, and we focus on the side effects, and there are side effects. But I think the benefits. Let's take me personally. I have some niche hobbies, some musical hobbies, and I can connect with people and discuss things that are extremely niche, and be part of a community, and also create things. Create music with people I couldn't possibly have targeted and been able to correspond with, and there's interestingly, there's documented evidence that one of the most, believe it or not, one of the most aspirational careers for young people nowadays is content creator or influencer. There's been enormous democratization of creative production. You don't need to be $50 million to make a film anymore. You can use consumer electronics and mass communication channels to make art. And yes, we have all of those side effects, like how do you verify what is true, which is why the regulatory question is so important, and why the educational question is so important. So one of the discussions I have with my daughter's schools is, how are you educating people to be skeptical about the sources of information, and to what are the cost-effective, time-effective sort of verification mechanisms for verifying claims, to make that part of education, which is a huge difference from the education that I had. The education I had was mainly about knowing things. If you know this about algebra and this about geography, that will help you with your job in 20 years' time. It's sort of like the algorithm for my education. But now that information is trivial, or I can find out anything from anywhere. It's more an authentication and a verification and a trust problem. And I think we need to figure that out as a society. We already have some good mechanisms, like in a way, it's not a new problem. We have to decide who to trust, and traditionally, one way of doing that is with repeated interactions. So if I can abuse your trust and we have repeated relationship, then essentially you can assume I have an incentive not to abuse our trust. We can do that with the law, which is mandated penalties for breaching a contract. We can do that with expert opinion. The experts think you should be very wary of this sort of anti-scientific opinion or whatever. But we need new technologies and even technologies to help with these trust problems. And we do have some embryonic answers. So, for instance, rater rating systems are quite an interesting development. Why would we buy secondhand junk on the internet from people we don't know? Why would I buy a secondhand trumpet from Poland, from somebody I'm never going to do business with again? It's because I know how other people that bought from this person feel about that person. So we have sort of rater rating. We have a reputational system. I think that's one hint. I think there's I think we have AI is moving towards verification of the logic of an answer. Not only what is the answer, but what is the logic behind an answer. So you can verify not just the end product, the answer to the question, but also the steps that were taken to achieve it. But it's an unsolved problem. I think identity verification and trust and thinking about human-machine interfaces in new and creative ways, like the whole system of the humans plus the technology. These are relatively new problems that we need to solve, and I'm an optimist. I believe that we will solve those problems, but not overnight.
My friend Craig Mundy from Microsoft has been working on an adjudicator for AI, and it's based on how do we actually learn values. So I learned not to tell a lie because I heard the fable that George Washington chopped down his father's cherry tree, and when confronted with that, he said, "Father, I cannot tell a lie. I chopped down your cherry tree." That literally is how I remember vividly how I learned you can't tell a lie. So they've actually been training an AI system with fables to teach it moral reasoning, and then trying to filter decisions, that every decision it makes through that moral reasoning net. So there's a lot of work being done on this, but it's a really good question you asked. Thank you. One more here, and then we'll force everyone to buy Martin's book, or we'll invite everyone to buy Martin's book. Go ahead. Yeah.
I'll invite Martin to give us maybe one more teaser from the book. I think similar and perhaps a slightly more optimistic angle on this topic. You do have at least a couple of marketers in the audience, so not to rat us out, who fully understand the transactional value that we are participating in when you're using these platforms. I'm curious in particular, you've been talking about trust, but did you unpack any of the changes to how we define credentialing now? Because as I know, Tom, you talked about the New York Times evolution, which has been up and down in many cases, and they continue to evolve. But there also is a lot of positive power in the fact that when I'm choosing a recipe, it's not just because some woman on television who I've been told is a phenomenal cook tells me it's good. It's that thousands of people are validating that it's good. And I think of it as, I am a New York Times subscriber, but I don't get my news by going to the New York Times homepage and scrolling down one by one in what New York Times wants me to read. It is largely the articles that are surfaced to me based on interactions on Instagram that is going to send me to what I read. And so I'm curious if Martin, you looked at some of how the psychology is changing around what does give me that trust and validation. And obviously the makers of TikTok and others see it as, well, there's tens of thousands of people, including people that are similar to you and that you are connected to, that tell you that you'll like this and you'll enjoy this.
I mean, in a way, my conclusion after talking to a lot of evolutionary biologists and brain scientists about the scientific logic of liking is that essentially we're looking more at a mirror than an innovation. In a sense, the tremendous success of the like button in terms of this small thing creating the entire industry, overturning other industry, how could such incredible leverage be possible? It's that there was nothing new about it. In fact, there was a very famous and influential book that came out in Silicon Valley called Don't Make Me Think at about, around, I think, 2000, which is exactly when all of this is happening. And the idea was quite an interesting idea. The idea was that the word innovation, to make things new, it sort of suggests novelty. It sort of suggests that you should focus on new features and things that have never been possible before. But the thesis of this book was, well, that's friction. It will be far better if we want an innovation to spread if actually we emphasize the familiarity, not the novelty. And of course, the like button is, the thumbs up gesture is something we've been using for millennia, and the brain chemistry that seeks the recognition and these, what Professor Christakis calls the social suite of behaviors, a preference for mild hierarchy. We look at who other people are learning from, homophily. We like to learn from people like us. That's not new in the technology. The technology spread precisely because these were innately human universal properties. So in a sense, we are using our own evolutionary biology to solve these problems of who to learn from, and not often explicitly, like I ask people, why did you click that site or something, but implicitly. We've had like millions of years of evolutionary programming to do that. So the problem in some ways is us, and we have to figure out how to use that freedom. And by the way, the brain science says that it's not, the like button is not like of real world liking. it's exactly the same brain chemistry as reward liking. So liking and being liked digitally is the same dopamine release in the nucleus accumbens, in the limbic brain, and that's exactly what happens in real life. And so the difference is, what's the difference? Is there a difference? Not of quality, there's just a difference of quantity. It's that I can only meet 10 people a day called Tom, but online I could meet 100. And if I'm a teenager in a formative stage of my mental development, I may be very sensitive to the social comparison. So that's the problem we need to solve. But in a sense, these technologies it's a very human technology, and also we have the social and regulatory agency to decide how we're gonna use this freedom.
Well, Martin, I want to thank you. All I can say is I really liked this lecture. And everyone should like this book that's on sale in the lobby. And thank you very much.
Well, thank you
Yeah.
again, Tom,
Thanks
and
so much.
thank you, Planet World.